Chapter 27. Hannah's face worked into an ugly red, mottled grimace. Doreen wanted to both hug her and hit her for what she'd done. "You never meant to hurt Betty. Or rather, you did at the moment, but you never meant to kill her," Doreen said thoughtfully. "What did you do? Hit her over the head? Knock her out? Suffocate her?" She studied Hannah's face, looking for an answer, but Hannah seemed beyond speech. "So, how is it Betty's uncle knew?" Again Doreen looked for a reaction, but none came. Hannah appeared to be too involved in her own grief. "Brian must have seen you." At that, Hannah gave a slow nod. "He did. He saw us before, when we were curled up in bed together. And he knew. Then he heard the fight we had," she said slowly, sadly. "He came to see what was going on. But he was a little too late to save her." Doreen wondered if that wasn't on purpose. It sounded like Brian was more interested in watching the two of them, seeing what he could get out of it. To confirm her thoughts, she asked, "Did he step forward and offer to help?" Hannah nodded. "At the time I was desperate to hide what I'd done. And yet inside I was breaking apart because I loved her. I really loved her. But I knew she was on a one-way track that just wouldn't stop." "So it really had nothing to do with the jewels, did it?" Hannah shook her head slowly. "No. Not then. She just disappeared, and nobody thought anything of it. But then Lansdowne ran into a spot of trouble. He owed some money to some very bad and dangerous people, and he needed to pay up. He came to me. His way of finding a new source of cash. But I didn't have anything. So he went to my father. Brian told my father about Betty and me, about him having an illicit affair with Betty, a minor. And then Brian told my father that I'd killed Betty. My dad cheerfully cooperated at that point. He set it up to look like a robbery. Betty's father was hired to break in and to steal the jewels. I don't think Lansdowne knew about that. But when his brother got caught, Brian never stepped up and confessed either," she said bitterly. "I still don't understand why Stephen never told on Brian. But Brian was all about saving his own ass. He didn't give a damn about anybody else's." Doreen could have told Hannah that men like Brian were the same all over, regardless of any perceived social position. "He couldn't let the money supply dry up," Doreen said softly. "Did Lansdowne continue to blackmail your family until his own death?" Hannah nodded slowly. "He did, but we didn't have any more money for him, not from our side of the family, not to get the sums he was always after. And the Thoreau family might support their poorer relations, but they didn't pay blackmailers. So Lansdowne tried to go behind my father's back by blackmailing my mother, but she kicked Lansdowne out of the house and said she didn't believe any of it. After that, I honestly to this day don't know if Lansdowne died a natural death, or if my father finally had had enough of his blackmailer. Then father died a couple years after Lansdowne. It wouldn't surprise me if mother killed him at that point." "Was it Lansdowne's idea to dismember Betty?" Hannah nodded. "He was doing quite a few gardening jobs at the time. We put her in a chest freezer here at his house, and then cut her up into pieces, so he could get them into the gardens without anybody knowing. The problem was, the creek went really high the following spring and one of the garden beds washed out. A lot of properties along the creek washed out. We were lucky just one arm showed up. I stayed quiet. So did he. And the case went cold." Hannah turned on Doreen, her voice turning vicious. "Until you arrived and dredged it all back up again. We found a second arm," Doreen said quietly. "And a right foot and lower leg." Hannah's mouth dropped open and a small scream escaped. "Are you serious?" Doreen nodded. "Mother Earth always gives up her secrets. She might take a little time, or she might take a long time, but eventually the truth rises to the surface. Doreen motioned at the garden behind her. Which part do you have here? Hannah looked at the back garden and whispered, her trunk. What were you going to do with it? Doreen waved at the empty backyard. No one has lived here in forever. Why would you come here now? Those rumors about you digging into things you shouldn't be, and how you've been into the begonias. Why begonias? Doreen couldn't help asking again. Did Betty hate them? As a pained expression whispered across the other woman's face, Doreen understood. No, Betty loved them, didn't she? At Hannah's slow nod, Doreen felt her heart wrench. As if words were beyond her, Hannah nodded slowly, the color in her face non-existent, and Doreen understood further. I'm sorry. That's a heavy burden for you to carry all these years. I'm surprised about the ivory box too, and the ring. I gave her the ring, but she threw it back at me when we fought that night. And the box was from my father, Hannah said softly. I thought it fitting that she be buried with them. After she'd slept with him to get it, she'd sleep forever with the spoils of her actions. Doreen hated to hear this, whether it was important or not. Then Hannah grew quiet and stared at Doreen for a moment, a cunning and calculating look entering her eyes. Doreen shook her head. Oh no, you don't. The game is up, and you can't kill me and bury me in the garden too. Why not? You have been asking questions all around town. Who knows who might have killed you? I know at least half a dozen people who would like to. Hannah glanced around slowly, as if looking for witnesses. Down the street, Doreen could hear a vehicle. She wondered if Mac had gotten the message. Not that she'd made it very clear. If he was any kind of a detective, he would have contacted Nan. Doreen backed up several paces to the garage. The problem with this scenario was, if Doreen got caught in the backyard and somebody from Hannah's family came here before Mac did, there was a good chance Doreen would end up cornered. And potentially in the garden in the begonias, along with poor Betty. Doreen turned to see who had arrived, and caught movement out of the corner of her eye. She spun. As the shovel came down hard on her shoulder, she defensively raised her arm, but the blow still knocked her down. Muggs barked like crazy and went on the attack. He tugged on Hannah's pant cuffs. And Goliath. Wow. Doreen lay on the grass partially stunned, and watched as Goliath clawed his way up Hannah's legs. Hannah screamed, "Get them off me! Get them off me!" But her screams attracted Thaddeus. He flew on top of her head but couldn't quite get into position, so dug his claws into the nest of hair she had on top. She screamed even more. Thaddeus imitated her screaming. Muggs barked louder. Goliath howled. And Mac walked into the backyard, his gun drawn, and roared, "What the hell is going on?" Doreen glanced up at him. Hannah killed Betty. And Hannah fell to her knees, crying. I did. I killed Betty. Dear God, help me. I loved her too much to let her go.